Okay, we've all been there, right? You're out and about, maybe in a new part of town, and suddenly, bam, the urge hits.
The dreaded search for a restroom begins.
Exactly. And just when you think you found a beacon of hope, you're met with that soul-crushing sign. Restrooms for customers only.
Talk about a mood killer. Suddenly, that double shot espresso feels like a terrible life choice.
It's like the universal symbol for go find somewhere else to exist, right? But what if I told you this whole public restrooms situation is a much bigger deal than just a minor inconvenience?
Oh, absolutely. It's way more than just finding a clean stall, that's for sure.
We're talking policy gaps, social inequalities, even human rights, all connected to something as basic as using the bathroom.
It's true. You wouldn't think something so, well, essential would be so complicated.
Right. So today we're diving deep into the surprising world of public restrooms. And trust me, you'll never look at that customers only sign the same way again.
Get ready for some serious potty talk, folks.
To guide our deep dive, we've got three fantastic sources lined up. First, we've got U.S. public health mandates and the restroom problem in America, a call to action from the American Restroom Association.
Don't let the title scare you. It's surprisingly engaging.
Then we're going to unpack the diaper divide report from Aeroflow Urology. And before you think we're just talking about babies, this report goes deep into how the lack of restrooms and affordable hygiene products affects adults in some pretty profound ways.
It's a really eye-opening look at the challenges people face.
And to round things out, we have the Public Toilet Advocacy Toolkit from an organization called Get This PHLUSH.
Yeah, you read that right, PHLUSH. They're tackling a pretty essential issue, and they've put together an amazingly thorough guide on making your voice heard on, well, all things toilet-related.
Which honestly, before diving into these sources, I never would have imagined campaigning for toilets. But it does make you wonder, why is this even a thing?
Exactly. You'd think we'd be past this by now.
Right. Can't we all agree that having access to a decent public restroom should just be a given?
You'd think so, but the reality is much more, well, complicated. Think about it. How many times a day do you use the restroom?
Oh gosh, I don't even want to count. Maybe 6, 7 times?
Right, and that's the average person. Now imagine navigating a city, maybe dealing with a medical condition, or caring for a child, all while trying to find a safe and accessible restroom.
Okay, yeah, when you put it like that.
Suddenly those customers-only signs feel like more than just an inconvenience, don't they?
Absolutely. It's almost like a barrier.
Exactly. And for many people, that's exactly what there are very real barriers to participating in everyday life. In fact, there's even a term for it, the restroom challenged.
The restroom challenged. Okay, tell me more about that. What does that even mean?
Well, that's what's so fascinating about these sources. Each one tackles a different piece of this puzzle. We're talking about the systemic issues, the personal stories, even some potential solutions.
So the restroom challenged. This idea that for some people, finding a public bathroom isn't just a hassle, it's a genuine obstacle. Where do we even begin to unpack that?
Well, our first source, that report from the American Restroom Association, it throws some hard-hitting facts at us right out of the gate. Did you know that the U.S. Department of Labor, actually mandates restrooms in workplaces?
Wait, really? There's a whole government agency dedicated to making sure I get my bathroom breaks at work.
It's true. Through OSHA, they've got all these regulations in place to ensure that employees have what they need and will not suffer adverse health effects. But, and here's the kicker.
Yeah.
There's absolutely nothing comparable for public spaces.
Hold on. So you're telling me my office bathroom break is protected by the federal government, but if I'm, out at the park on a Saturday afternoon, it's a total free-for-all?
Essentially, yeah. And that's where our next source comes in, the Diaper Divide Report. Now, I know it sounds like we're just talking about babies, but this report does an incredible job of shining a light on how this lack of public restroom access, it has this ripple effect on adults too, especially when you start to factor in the cost of essential hygiene products.
Oh, okay. I gotta be honest. I'm still trying to wrap my head around how diapers connect to adults in this context.
Yeah, it's not just about babies. Think about adults with disabilities, seniors, anyone dealing with incontinence, They
Yeah.
rely on these products too. And get this, according to this report, a staggering 1 in 3 U.S. families struggle to afford these essential supplies.
1 in 3 families. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a huge number of people being forced to make really, really difficult choices.
Exactly. And the report, it goes into how this divide forces people to skip meals, reuse products in ways that could be unsanitary or even dangerous, miss work or school. all because they lack access to these basic necessities. And then when you factor in the lack of public restrooms, especially for those with medical conditions, it just creates this awful, vicious cycle.
It's honestly heartbreaking and a little infuriating, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
That something like this is even an issue in this day and age.
I know.
It's mind-boggling. So where does our final source, the PHL-USH Advocacy Toolkit, where does that come into play?
So PHL-USH, they dive into the nitty-gritty of how to actually make a difference. They cover everything: restroom design, site selection, even how to run a successful campaign for, you guessed it, more public toilets.
Campaigning for toilets. I mean, it sounds strange at first, but I'm starting to get why it's so important.
Oh, it's a thing. And it's not just about, like, randomly sticking toilets anywhere, you know. They get into the specifics of safety, accessibility, making sure those restrooms are properly maintained. It's a lot more complex than you might think.
This is definitely way more involved than I ever realized. But is it really a social justice issue? I mean,
one quote from our sources really stuck with me. A doctor, he was testifying about a patient who needed frequent diaper changes. And he actually said, and I quote, "People are allowed to be dirty. I would allow him to be a little dirty for a couple of days."
wait, a doctor actually said that. That is horrifying.
Yeah, it's a pretty shocking statement, right? But this quote, as awful as it is, it really highlights how these issues, they connect to these bigger conversations about dignity, about healthcare access, about who gets to feel comfortable existing in public spaces.
You're right. That quote is like a punch to the gut. It's clear this isn't just about, finding a place to pee. It's about basic human rights. So let's talk about who is most affected by this. Who are the restroom challenged?
Well, as you can probably imagine, it's often the people who already face barriers in our society. Our sources, they highlight how people with disabilities have a particularly difficult time. Imagine trying to navigate a city in a wheelchair, or with a chronic illness that requires frequent bathroom breaks. It's tough enough as it is, but without that reliable access to restrooms, it becomes nearly impossible.
And it's not just about accessibility, right? We were talking about the financial burden of supplies, too. I imagine low-income families, they're deeply affected by this whole thing as well.
Oh, absolutely. That diaper divide report, it really drives home how people who are already struggling financially often just can't afford to pay for those, pay toilets or buy something at a cafe just to use the restroom. It's like,
they're being punished for having basic human needs.
it's a terrible cycle of exclusion. You hit the nail on the head with that. And it's not even just about affordability either. It's about stigma, too.
Oh.
Think about individuals with medical conditions like Crohn's disease or overactive bladder, things like that. These conditions, they might not be visible, and our sources talk about how they are often very stigmatized.
Yeah, absolutely.
It can be really, really difficult for people to advocate for their needs when they feel ashamed or judged for something they can't control.
So they might be the people who need this access more than anyone, but are often the least likely to speak up about it.
It's a tough situation all around. And sadly, it's not just those folks either. Our research showed that this is an issue that disproportionately affects women, the elderly, transgender individuals as well.
Right. And I guess it makes sense when you think about it. I mean, how many times have we seen those long lines for the women's restroom?
Exactly. Public restrooms designed for women often have these crazy long lines, not nearly enough stalls, and it just creates another level of, frustration and difficulty. And then you think about transgender individuals. For them, just finding a safe and accessible restroom can be a huge challenge, physically and emotionally.
It's really kind of upsetting, really, how something so basic has become so complicated.
No, you're preaching to the choir, for sure.
Yeah.
There was actually one story from our research that really got to me. It was about students, get this, students being denied bathroom breaks at school.
You're kidding, right? You mean like during class?
During class, yeah. And the excuses ranged from, like, security concerns to straight up using it as a form of punishment.
That is wild. It's just mind-boggling that we're failing to see that even kids have basic needs.
It's unbelievable.
So it's clear we've got a long way to go. But after hearing all of this, all these challenges, is there anything being done to change things? Give me some hope here.
Don't worry, there's hope. The PHL-US Toolkit, it's actually full of really inspiring examples of successful advocacy efforts.
Okay, so tell me about some wins. What's working?
Well, one of the most interesting takeaways for me was how good design can actually make a world of difference. According to PHL-USH, well-designed restrooms can actually deter crime and improve safety.
Really? Huh. I always figured, public restrooms were kind of magnets for trouble.
Yeah, it seems kind of counterintuitive, but when you think about it, well-lit, visible spaces, they tend to discourage bad behavior, so it makes sense. And even beyond just design, PHLUSH gives a ton of examples of how community action can create real, tangible change. They've got stories about grassroots campaigns that have successfully pushed for policy changes or even gotten new facilities built because of their efforts.
It's not a hopeless cause.
Not at all. And what I think is so great is how much this issue connects to so many other important movements, accessible cities, public health, creating welcoming spaces for everyone. It's all connected.
That's a great point. So next time I see one of those dreaded restrooms for customers only signs, what can I do besides, sighing dramatically?
Well, I think first and foremost, just remember what we've talked about today. Think about the hidden consequences, the people who are most affected. Maybe you choose to spend your money elsewhere. Maybe you even reach out to the business, explain why you're taking your business elsewhere, Make them aware that those signs, they send a message, even if they don't realize it.
I like it. Hit them where it hurts.
A little economic activism never hurt anybody, right? And of course, you can always check out the show notes. We'll have links to all of the source material that we talked about today. If you want to really dive deep, PHLUSH even has resources for starting your own advocacy campaign.
Fantastic. So it sounds like this deep dive wasn't just about finding the perfect public restroom, but really about realizing how this seemingly small thing, it impacts all of us in a much bigger way than we might realize. And that we can actually do something about it.
That's the power of knowledge, right? And in this case, a little bit of toilet talk.
Well, I couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into, what do we call it? Ah, yes, the surprising politics of potty parody.
Until next time.